Hey everyone, welcome back. It is the second Sunday of Christmas, although now we're in 2022. Hope you've all had a good New Year and Christmas break. Hope you had a break. Hope you connected with God. I hope you were able to identify maybe those areas in your life where God is not present or doesn't feel present. I should say God is present everywhere, but we don't always feel it. So 2 weeks ago, or a week ago really, on Christmas Eve, we talked about um, Jesus being vulnerable, coming as an infant, being with us. Um, and then 2 days later, on the first Sunday of Christmas season, we talked about those areas. Talked about thinking about those areas where it feels like Jesus is not with us, and trying to, at least at the beginning of this challenge, just starting to identify those areas in our life is a huge step forward. That's a huge step to moving forward in our relationship with Jesus. And so now we're going to, in the second Sunday of Christmas, our reading is from the very first chapter of the book of John, the Gospel of John, which has a very different feel from Matthew and Luke. One of the things we talked about last week is, if you remember correctly, is when we feel like Jesus is not with us, and how can we bring Jesus into those areas where we feel like he's distant, or we feel like he's gone, or we feel like we're angry with him because we feel like he hasn't performed the way we want him to. And we talked about how he is about the Father's business. He is at work. He's there. He's with us. He's Emmanuel. But what's interesting in the book of John here is we get a clearer sense of one of the ways in which he's with us. And sometimes it's not what we want to hear. It really isn't. But it's very powerful once we understand this. And this is something we've talked about at North Harbor a number of times. It comes up over and over again. But it's so important. So as we move forward thinking about these areas where we feel like Jesus is not present, this area where God is not in our lives, and we try to invite him in, usually that area is, maybe something that it's a trial, it's something we're struggling with, it's something that we don't want to look at, it's a part of our life we don't want to deal with, or maybe too painful. And so one of the questions that we want to think about is, what are some of the tools? How is God with us? How do we bring God in? If we feel like God is not there, where can we turn, and how can we bring God in? We talk about prayer, we talk about solitude, we talk about worship, we talk about study and learning, all these disciplines that are very powerful, but they're very one-on-one. And what John talks about here in the beginning of his gospel is so important for us to learn. So we're going to jump in here at verse 10. So it's the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 10. It says, but although the world was made through Jesus, the world didn't recognize him when he came. The world didn't recognize him when he came. So when it talks about the world, it's talking about the worldly systems, the way the world works, the governments, and just the culture and the way the world works. It just does not recognize God, because so many of the things that we learn from Scripture and we learn from Jesus is, it seems very counterintuitive, right? Pray for those who persecute you. Love your enemies. Forgive always. Now, these aren't easy necessarily, but they are the teachings of Jesus. And so there's something very powerful there when we do them. But we're not always, and maybe rarely, are we going to find this in the world. So when we're struggling with things and we go to the world, sometimes we're spinning our wheels and we feel like we're just not getting anywhere, right? And we feel like God is not with us. Jesus is not with us. We sing about Emmanuel at Christmas, God with us, but we're just not always feeling it. So the world is not going to recognize God. Even his own land, among his own people, he was not accepted. But to all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. This is a relational thing. To all of those who really see him and accept him and believe him and see Jesus for who he is, as God, resurrected, he gives the right to be children of God. There's a relational connection. We are now a family. That's a relational term. That's a community term, and it's gonna keep rolling here. This is key. They are reborn. This is not a physical birth resulting from human passion or plan. This rebirth comes from God. There's something new. We are a new person, right? This author is saying. So the Word became human and lived here on earth among us. And it's that term, I'm going to geek out on the words again and the grammar, but it's the term among us. He lives among us. And what this is saying, what John is saying in particular, the first century Jewish person reading this would understand what he's saying. He's referring back to the time of the wilderness wanderings of Israel. They had been delivered out of Egypt. God is leading them, but they're in this desert. There's no resources. And God commands them to build a tabernacle, and the tabernacle sits right in the middle of the whole community. So everyone's got their Bedouins, so they got tents, and then in the middle of their whole community, which is a lot of people, they got the tabernacle, a temple, a portable temple right in the midst of them. And that temple, like I said last week, represents the presence of God among his people. So what John is saying is that he pitched his tent among us. Now, we often read that and think that he pitched his tent with us, like with me. And yet I just don't feel so connected. But I want us to think outside the box here. And really what I believe John is saying is that what we have is a picture of God pitching his tent among all of our tents. It's a community. It's a community thing. God lives among us. And so God is with that community that you worship with. God is with the people that you pray with. God is with the people that share the same confession of faith. Even if the church looks a bit different, if that confession of faith and faith in Jesus is there, then we are a part of a community. And God is there in that community. And so oftentimes, that place where we don't feel like we are with Jesus or Jesus is not with us, perhaps part of the way forward is to enter into community living. In other words, instead of trying to wrestle this out on my own, and all good spiritual disciplines, prayer, worship, all these things done individually are very much needed. But what's also needed is that we need to open up and be vulnerable with one another in those areas where we feel like Jesus is not with us. Because God is with our friends and family and all part of this community as well, and they may have an answer. Paul, the Apostle Paul, talks about the church being very diversely gifted. Someone's really great at counseling. Another person's good at instruction. Another person's good at helping. Another person's good at just saying, I love you. One person, other people are good at the surprise gifts. Other people confront us with a truth, that we need to hear. That's where we need to go. That's where God dwells. God doesn't dwell necessarily or only in me. We have the presence of the Spirit within us, but the presence of God is among and with the people, the community, and we need to look there to find God, to find that presence. When we feel like Jesus isn't with us, that's where we need to go, that community. And that's so hard, particularly here in the West, in America. We are so individualistic. We want to be able to do this on ourselves. We want to be productive. We want to be efficient. And we don't want to feel like we need other people. I was talking to someone else who's asking about help for something, and they kept putting this project off. They just don't want to ask for help. They don't like doing that. And they said that to me. They said, I just hate asking for help. I said, yeah, I don't either. I don't. And it places us in a very vulnerable position. On Christmas Eve, we talked about this. Part of what it means for God to be with us is that God comes as an infant. There's nothing more vulnerable than that. God places himself and his care into the hands of Mary and Joseph. I mean, God in the flesh is not doing much for us at this point. He's depending on us. That is the kind of vulnerability that God wants to see with us, because that's what being with Jesus and being with others and being with other Christians and being a part of the temple community is about. It's hard, it's painful, and many people over these last 18 months have been working on this, opening up, and it's a difficult, painful process, and I know it's hard. I've been doing it as well, and but I want to encourage you, if we can identify Jesus as vulnerable, coming to live with us, being with us, not to just to be with us in our times of hurt, and we can draw such comfort for that. If that's what he does, and he shows that sort of vulnerability, and we have this area that we talked about last week where we feel like Jesus isn't there, can we go to a trusted friend, someone who's able to bear the weight of the things you're wrestling with? Okay, we've all been in situations where people kind of share too much. We gotta have the appropriate relationships there, and we need to grow those relationships and nurture those relationships. We talk about prayer. We talk about all these things we want to nurture, God's relationship with us and our relationship with God. We got to do that with one another as well. We got to pray with one another, for one another. We got to ask, how are you doing? What's going on? And give people an honest answer. So as we move into this beyond Christmas, God with us, Emmanuel, the challenge this week leading up to our next in-person service on January 9th is to reach out. Ask someone how they're doing. Try to get a real answer, honest answer from them. And perhaps reaching out with someone and saying, here's what I'm struggling with, and being honest with that. And not just, these don't have to just revolve around trials. We kind of get heavy talking about all the trials we go through, but the celebrations, can we reach out and say, hey, this is what I experienced this week. I just want to share it with you. Enter into community. He pitched his tent among us. All right? Let's think about that. That's the challenge for the coming week, and we'll see you next Sunday on January 2nd. God bless.